And we're back. We're going to be going over regulators today for the CCM markers. I've got a couple of regulators here. There are a bunch of different types of looking CCM regulators out there, but for the most part they're the same on the inside, bar just a few things that really won't matter for showing you how to take them apart and put them back together. So this is a Series 6, 6.5, those sorts of things. That's what the milling you see on modern ones. This is the T2 here on the left. The only real difference here, as they went in later instantiations, is you can see how they dropped the input down. It's a really cool idea. It allowed you to keep the fitting underneath the grip frame and not run the fitting out one of the sides. You could then run it right under the grip frame and keep that line the air line very short, and just made a lot more sense. So kudos to CCM for doing that. But the point is, though, is that internally these don't change. So we'll be doing one video here that I will link when I do the other markers to take apart just the regulator, and I'll show you how to take it apart, put it back together, and tech it. And so this will serve as the kind of standard regulator video. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do is loosen up the pressure screw on the bottom, and you can just turn that until it gets soft, until you feel tension release. Boom, there, it's released about right there. The reason for that is, usually then, as long as your hands are dry and the regulator is dry, which mine were, I just dried it off a little bit more, usually these two halves then just come right apart. If you have over tightened them, you can then use the flats on the regulator and a spanner, a crescent wrench, to take this apart. I don't like to do that because, you know, I've got steel on my anodizing. I paid a lot for the marker, and I don't want to mar this. So I try to make it so I release this tension. The two halves then come apart, and that's the first set. We're going to go on the bottom two first. Take the screw out all the way here. You might have a shorter screw when you take yours apart. It just depends on what year regulator you have. And I'll show you why that is here in a minute. Everything gets cleaned when you take it apart. For me, at least it does. And then I just use my 3/16 Allen key, which is what took that screw out. I use that 3/16 just to push all the rest of the stuff out. Now, this reg was just clean, so there's not going to be a very good showing of what a dirty regulator looks like. But what a dirty regulator looks like is that when you run your fingers on the inside, you're going to come away with kind of a gray gunk. That's not horrible. If you start coming away with grit and things like that, you know you've went too long. Clean it more often. If you're a snake player, clean this often. And here's why. If you can see right here, let me grab my pick so I can point that out. There is a channel. Mine's even got dirt in it, so this is perfect. There's a channel here that's a relief valve, a pressure relief, not valve, pressure relief area that even with that screw in, you can still see, I'm going to make sure you can see that little hole right there can let dirt in. The dirt can come in here, get in this seal, and screw things up. If you're a snake player, clean your regulator often. You're usually dragging that thing through the mud. I'm a bat guy, so you know I go up into bunkers and things like that, but you're not going to see me in a snake, and if you do, you're just going to laugh. It's not pretty. Check the inside of your regulator body and make sure that there's no marring or any mess going on in there. If there is, you have had dirt in there or something else is going wrong. The CCM regulator is based on the Bob Long torpedo, and Bob used to put in a aluminum piston here. This is why I love that CCM used Delrin. And that aluminum piston could rock back and forth inside here and just cause all sorts of marring. I've had Bob Long torpedoes that I had to replace just the bottom tube because it had gotten marred so bad it wouldn't seal. If you look at mine, I've played with my T2 for quite some time, and I'm not even sure if you're going to be able to see this. See if I can get the right thing here. In there, you might be able to see a little bit of wear. A little bit of wear is not a big deal. That's just that piston moving up and down, and so you don't be too worried about that. The main thing you want to check in this bottom tube is to make sure everything stays lubricated and is you know, nice and clean. But this in particular, take a look at the top of the regulator piston, okay, and make sure that this this recess looks good. It's not chewed up or marred up. And then the major point here is to check this O-ring. Make sure it's clean, no nicks, no nothing. And then when you're putting it back together, this is our hater sauce marmalade as talked about in the first video. When you're putting it back together, a thin coat of hater sauce or whatever lubricant you use works. Okay? Put that back together. And then how that goes back together is just like that. You can see that has one way, the top hat fits in the bottom of the spring, and then when you screw that in, that fits in there. So drop that in. This is going to be under a little bit of pressure, so you got to finesse it a little bit. You want it to be under pressure because that's that O-ring seating for you, okay? Screw this in until you start to feel a little resistance, and then stop. Move that out of the way so it might be a little bit easier to see. A little bit of resistance, stop. Bottom is now clean, put back together. I am going to add a little bit of marmalade to the top half of this because there's one static O-ring right there. Check it for nicks. Generally, I think I've replaced one of those in my life. Those are going to be okay, so don't worry about that too much. The top half of the regulator has a couple of O-rings. One here is the static one that seals it inside of the VRA, the vertical regulator adapter. Okay. You want to make sure that that doesn't have any nicks. That's just a bottle O-ring. So a bottle O-ring can replace that. And this is just one of those spacer O-rings that I have on my regs to make sure that when I'm screwing it in, it's aligning with the body where I want it to align. And that's up to you, you know, how you do that. You can see there would be a little bit of a gap. I put an O-ring in there. You know, it does nothing. But it makes me feel better, I guess. And it stops it from vibrating and changing. It might keep the dirt out. So who knows? The next portion here, and yours might differ. Yours might differ depending on the year of the regulator that you're going to be pulling out, okay? Yours might differ. You might have a nut in here that does not look like this. It might be externally set to be taken apart. You can use a crescent wrench to get a hold of that. Preferably, you're going to want to use a socket to grab the outside there and turn it off. It's just a lot easier. But if you have what looks like this, and this is by far an improvement, this takes, ta-da, the cocker tool. The valve tool for snipers and cockers. Great improvement because it uses a tool you've got to have anyway, and it makes it way easier to get that apart. Now, when you take that apart, it's going to come apart like this. Spring, hey, spring, pin, O-ring, and then this guy, okay, that has one static O-ring, okay? The main thing you're going to want to look at here is this O-ring. 90% of the problems in your regulator are this O-ring has crushed, lost its durometer, it's not as dense as it used to be, it's got too much lubrication on it, whatever, and it's letting the regulator let air by and not regulating. Change it if you've got any issues. Usually that's your problem. 10% of the time, you know, this is anecdotal, it's going to be the O-ring in here that's causing problems. If you got a problem with your reg and you don't know what's going on, change both those O-rings. They're dirt cheap, and that will probably solve your problem. Make sure this pin is straight. If you over tighten the screw here, you can bend this pin. This pin seats right here on the Delrin piston, okay? So if you over tighten that, bad juju. Replace the pin if it gets bent. This spring, you know, I've never replaced a spring. I've got some in my kit, but there it is. Run this O-ring dry, all right? Run it dry. Too much lube will let air sneak by. I always add just a little bit of marmalade on my static O-rings, just for, I don't know, what I do. Clean this up on the inside. You can clean it up with, spray it out with your bottle, use your Q-tips, clean all that out, make sure it's absolutely clean. Mine's clean, so I'm not going to worry about it. And then reassemble, put that back together. Grab your cocker valve tool, sniper valve tool, and snug that down. Don't need to reef on it. It's got an O-ring there. Just snug, boom, you're done. Okay? Then, tighten this down. Put these two halves back together. Now your reg is essentially back together. You're good to go here. So what we want to do is make sure that the output of this regulator is matching what you used to have when you took it apart, which for me is going to be around 300 psi. Now, this screw here is too far out. It's not even regulating right now. Well, it's not letting much air in. So I turn it into just about flush and give it an extra turn. That sets it around 300. I grab the other part of my regulator testing kit, which again allows this to be a closed system. I turn on the tank, and Viola, it's about 290. So I'm going to give that another little bit of love. Turn it up to about 300. They come from the factory at 350. Rod sets them at the factory at 350, and if you don't want to mess and you don't want to play games, set your markers at 350, all of them. From SS25 all the way across the board, 350, that's a great rule of thumb. I set mine just a little bit over 300. That's just what I do. I've found that that makes it pretty darn efficient. But, you know, I also haven't seen a huge deal with setting it at 350 and leaving it. So, up to you. That's how I set mine. Turn off this portion, which stops air coming into the reg. Degas. And that reg is set, man. That is all there is to it, to the regulator. I think a lot of people really overthink the regulator on this marker and think that it's just very complicated. It's not. It's essentially 2 O-rings that need to be replaced, making sure that everything stays clean, and just doing good preventative maintenance on your regulator, and you're going to have a good reg for years to come. So that's it on the regulator. We'll move to reassembling whatever marker is next in your list. So if it's a T2 or a Series 6 or a Series 6.5 or whatever it is in my series, this is the general regulator video. Move on to that next portion and you'll be good to go. See ya.